Hello and welcome to Clydebridge Station. Now this is a slightly different video today and there's a good reason why. When I've been talking about this layout and when I've been naming a couple of other layouts at the end of my regular videos, namely Dean Park Station, Strathpeffer Junction and Everard Junction, I've mentioned that they're set in the BR sectorisation era. And there'll be some people who'll be wondering what I mean by that. You know, there might be people who are new to the railway hobby altogether. But there might also be people who are not new to the railway hobby, who've only been in it since the privatisation era. And so they wouldn't actually know what I'm talking about. So the purpose of this video is to try and explain the history behind sectorisation on British Rail, to give you an idea of what sectorisation was, why they done sectorisation, and to explain how it all worked. And I hope that it gives you all that want to know a much better understanding of what things were like and why things were done. Any comments, queries or suggestions, put them in the comments box at the end. British Rail was run by the British Railways Board, which was set up in January 1948 as a nationalised industry to take over the running of all of Britain's railways, with the exception of the Glasgow Underground, the Liverpool Overhead Railway and the lines of the London Passenger Transport Board, later to become London Underground. And BR took over all the operations of the former Big Four that were created at grouping. To allow the system to operate and be managed effectively on a day-to-day basis, most aspects of railway running, operation and management had to be broken down into workable sized chunks. At the nationalisation in 1948, this was done by what was known as the regions. 6 were created initially, later reduced to 5, and then 6 were again. And most of these regions were actually based upon the old areas of the Big Four. The Scottish region took over all the operations of the LMS in Scotland, as well as the smaller Scottish operations of the London and North Eastern Railway, which included Dunbar Station and the branch to North Berwick. The North Eastern region took over all the lines in Northumberland, County Durham and Teesside and parts of North Yorkshire from the northeastern area of the London and North Eastern Railway. The Eastern region comprised all the other former LNER lines, which included those out of Liverpool Street and Fenchurch Street. However, in 1964, the northeastern region was abolished and it was all absorbed into the eastern region at York. But in 1988, the lines out of Fenchurch Street and Liverpool Street and all the lines in Norfolk and Suffolk and Essex were taken out of the eastern region and moved into the Anglian region, although that was only a paper exercise and a slight change of management for some of the staff and didn't affect the passenger at all, as you'll see why. The London Midland region comprised all the English operations of the LMS and the LMS's operations in North Wales. The Western region comprised all of the lines of the former Great Western Railway, which after 1964 all the southern region lines west of Salisbury were moved over to the Western region as well. The Western region also comprised all of the former Great Western operations in Wales, namely South Wales. The southern region comprised almost entirely all of the former lines of the Southern Railway, and this included the Isle of Wight, with the line from Ryde Pierhead to Shanklin. These regions had some territorial changes over the years, as I've mentioned to you. But during the 1970s, and in particular from 1976 onwards, there was a desire by various governments to get certain aspects of the railway to pay its way. This was mainly the main intercity lines and the main routes from London to Scotland, from England to Scotland, and from London and Bristol to the West Country. And these problems and concerns came up again in 1978 and later in 79. And there was a greater desire for a better accountability. At the same time, there was a concern that some aspects of railway management were not focused enough, and that there wasn't enough focus being given on the rail freight routes, for instance, or parcels trains. Everything was done on a region-wide basis. Movement of rolling stock from one region to another was another serious shortcoming. And there were also concerns that each region was only focusing on its main core routes, and that some more marginal routes and even some urban routes were largely forgotten about. With a desire to make it certain aspects of the railway pay, i.e. to cut subsidy, and also with a desire by central government and indeed to a certain extent the local authorities to see where their money went, under the stewardship of Sir Peter Parker, the chairman of British Rail, the railway planning was to be taken on to a new focus, and it was called sectorisation. The idea was that services would no longer be grouped by region, but would be grouped by traffic type. This would mean that each business sector would focus on its own services. This would allow also management of that sector to just look after its own interests. The change was certainly radical, and it was decided that there would be 5 business sectors created. These business sectors were provincial. You can see 2 locomotives there belonging to provincial, and rail freight, intercity, network South East, and parcels. Rail freight and parcels had always been seen as 2 distinct areas of operation, so naturally these formed the first 2 sectors. All the long distance services were grouped by intercity, which also included therefore all the high speed trains. Intercity was long distance high speed passenger travel, and this wasn't just on services to and from London, but on cross-country routes as well, particularly using Birmingham New Street as a hub. Services in the home counties and the southern region were grouped as the London and South East sector, which in 1986 became Network South East. Although the use of the term London and South East and Network South East is a bit ironic, because the territory actually stretched as far west as Exeter and as far north as Ipswich. The remaining services were those of the provincial services, which in 1991 became regional railways. The idea was that each business sector would take over a lot of the running of the railway from the regions. Ownership of the rolling stock would pass from the regions to the sectors. Management of the stations would also come under the day-to-day running of the sectors as well, although the staff at those stations were initially employed by the regions. To give you an example on that, when it began on the 5th of January 1982, the London and South East sector only had 30 people directly employed by it, and these were based at Waterloo Station in the LSE headquarters. The sectors would also take on the decisions on fares, marketing of services, and even timetabling. Investment was now sponsored by the sectors, and it was the responsibility of the regions to provide the staff for the trains and to carry out the investment that the sectors wanted. as a good example of that, when the East Coast Main Line was electrified from London to Edinburgh, work had already started in 1982 on that with the bedpan services and London to Welwyn Garden City local services. It was Intercity that sponsored the project. £306 million was spent on electrifying the East Coast Main Line and ordering 31 brand new electric trains to provide the service. And this was all sponsored by Intercity, but it was up to the region's civil engineers to deliver that project. The regions would therefore see their role simply reduced to providing the staffing and providing what the sectors wanted. When you went to the station, the money that you paid would go to whichever business sector or sectors you would happen to be using, and those sectors would then pay the regions to provide the services for them. This is why I explained that the change in the split of the Anglian lines of the Eastern region into the New Anglian region in 1988 was more of a small change of management and a paper exercise, because the services were still provided by Intercity, Regional Railways and Network South East. For the passengers on those lines, there was no actual... They would still contact the same people if they had any issues with the services. Now, you would have trains of these sectors operating in different parts, and some sectors were national, so you would be able to see Intercity or freight trains anywhere in the country. And that actually explains as well all these different colour schemes or liveries that you see on the trains, as each sector tried to market its own services and establish its own identity. Now, as far as I'm aware, depots at the time of sectorisation went under the control of various business sectors. So, for instance, if we take one example here with Network South East, they had several depots such as that St Leonard's in East Sussex, which would belong to that sector. Rail Freight had depots as well. All the sectors had their own depots. Each sector would own a depot, but that depot might also service other sectors' trains. To give you a good example of that, Inverness Depot belonged to Regional Railways through its ScotRail operation, but it also serviced freight locomotives and Intercity stock. Likewise, Heaton Depot was an Intercity depot, but it also serviced Regional Railways trains, some parcel stock, and very, very rarely it was serviced freight stock, although by this time freight stock was allocated to other depots. Thornaby Depot on Teesside was a rail freight depot, but it only ever serviced rail freight trains. Other sectors' trains never appeared at that depot in normal service. Now, this whole idea of business sectors also led British Rail to referring to its passengers as customers, which showed that they actually had their priorities right, and it was a good business way of looking at the problem. The sectors, of course, only had small teams of staff, but in 1990, Bob Reid, the chairman of British Rail, announced that sectorisation was to be made complete by 1992 and the regions would be abolished. And what this meant was massive radical changes again for the operations of the running of the railways, although it did not necessarily mean an initial day-to-day change for the passenger. Now, what I mean by that is that the track and stations would now actually be owned by a particular business sector. Other sectors could use those lines, providing they had the agreement with that sector, which always happened, and relevant fees were paid to each sector. Each line would be allocated a prime user, and they would own that line. Each station would have a prime user who would own that line. and that station, sorry, and they would then employ the staff at that station as well. Now, to give you an example of how this all works, we'll take the East Coast Main Line again. The line from London King's Cross to Edinburgh was allocated to Intercity. They were the prime user of that line. Rail Freight and Network South East on the southern bit of it, and Rail Freight and Provincial on the northern section of it, could actually access those lines, the East Coast Main Line as well. They would just have to pay Intercity for the use of that line. It also meant that Intercity became the direct owner of several stations on the line. Dunbar, Berwick-upon-Tweed, Newcastle Central, Grantham, Doncaster, London King's Cross, Peterborough, for instance, were now owned by Intercity. Network South East, incidentally, would use the southern section of the line, and they would be the owner of several stations on it, such as Hertford North, Sandy, Alexandra Palace. On the northern section of it, Regional Railways was now the owner of several stations on the line, such as Cramlington, Morpeth, Manners. The idea of the business sectors now taking on the full running and the abolition of the regions also meant a cutout of management, and it meant in particular in the London area that there was now one railway for the whole of the London and South East, whereas previously, even in the grouping days, there were four. The vast majority of the lines in the London and South East area now were owned by Network South East, and there were grand plans which were sadly never fully put into use because of privatisation, with a codename of Network 2000 that would have seen whole swathes of investment. The idea, incidentally, of sectorisation, as I mentioned to you earlier, brought about the problems of the moving of rolling stock. And this was something I touched upon when I was reviewing the Oxford Rail Mark IIIs and I gave a history of the push-pull service between Edinburgh and Glasgow. So I'll explain a bit more of it here. Previously, obviously, rolling stock was owned by the regions. And if a region wanted some rolling stock that another region had, it was often a long drawn out process to try and get the rolling stock moved from that one region to another. And it could take several months, possibly even a couple of years, to actually agree to the move. With sectorisation, when there was a downturn on the London-Paddington to the West Country route, that meant there was going to be a reduction in the number of trains needed, it was a relatively simple process for Intercity, who owned the high-speed trains, to simply move 5 of them initially from the West Country route to the London to Sheffield route, the Midland Main Line. Very simple process. It didn't have to go through any of the regions. It was Intercity's own stock. They could do what they want with it. The idea of the sponsorship of investment by the sectors also had the advantage that main lines could now come under the full control of one sector, and I've touched upon there the electrification of the East Coast Main Line. In an interview on Rail Watch in 1989, Paul Coya asked the project director for the East Coast Main Line, David Rollins, about, after they announced their plans, if they had to go to the sectors, his other colleagues, to find out what they wanted, and he did say that was absolutely essential. Now, what was actually discovered from that was that Regional Railways, ScotRail, wanted them to then electrify the short branch to North Berwick. That was what they wanted from the project as well. Although it was an intercity project to electrify the whole of the East Coast Main Line, it was important to talk to other sectors to see if there was anything they wanted, and encouraged some electrification of other lines. And the whole project was done right through, starting from 1984, in a period of 7 years it took for the whole project to be completed. Contrast that with the West Coast Main Line, which had the London Midland region up as far as the Scottish border, and then it had to deal with the Scottish region, who would have to try and sponsor the rest of it. This meant that the main line was not completely unified, and the Scottish region had already electrified a lot of the Strathclyde suburban routes. It took until 1974 for the completion of the West Coast mainline electrification north of Preston. So that shows you one of the advantages of the way of sectorisation. And it's a pity that sectorisation wasn't allowed to be allowed to bed in fully, and that the railways are privatised, because I think it would have seen a lot more investment on that. But that's really that's not really a place for this debate. That's for elsewhere. Now, with regards to the actual rolling stock that you see here, as I stated as well, it would have been owned by the sectors. But other sectors could use the rolling stock, A, if the owning sector didn't need it, i.e. it was available, and upon payment of the relative fees. That's not to say that occasionally a locomotive belonging to one sector was used by another sector, close inverted commas. I mean, we've got here the example of the rail freight loco on the regional railways train, and actually I've seen a photo of that particular loco in 1989 hauling a Trans-Pennine train. So it did happen that some sectors just used other sectors' rolling stock because it was just there at the time. Although I suspect whether higher fees were paid is another matter. It will be lost in the annals of time. One last thing to mention to you about the sectorisation era of British Rail that I haven't touched upon yet. One sector that's not on here is the civil engineering sector, or the departmental sector. That wasn't really a business sector as such. But for the record, their trains were a sort of dark grey, about that shade of grey there. And where we've got this band of black here, it was actually a yellow band on civil engineering locos. A bit like the Dutch train livery of the 70s. And indeed, it got the nickname the Dutch livery. So that's me trying to do my best to explain sectorisation to you. But before I do wrap up, I'd better explain who owns this station then. Well, it's the Scottish region, and the prime user is regional railways. Intercity and parcels can pay to access the station. As you can see here, we've got 3 parcels trains, 3 regional railways trains in. 2 intercity parcels and 3 regional railways trains in. The depot, that'll come under the auspices of regional railways, and it'll have ScotRail branding on it. And yes, the prime user will be ScotRail, but the other sectors can obviously pay to use the depot as well. I'll be doing another video where I'll explain in a bit more detail about the sectors, and it'll be called Meet the Sectors, and I'll try and get that up for you as soon as possible. And I'll go into more detail about each sector. What I will say is that all 5 sectors actually became officially operational on the 5th of January 1982. A very historical day in railway operation that has never actually been fully recorded and maintained in history. So I sincerely hope that that changes one day. What I'll do now is say thank you very much for watching, and if you want to look at some other sectorisation layouts, Dean Park Station is on video 200 now. Everard Junction is rebuilding his sectorisation era layout, and it's coming on very well. Strathpeffer Junction is doing his best right now, and he's in the same era and indeed the same region as myself and Dean Park, and I'm sure all of them would like to have your support. And OORail.com, all of these are on YouTube, and they're all in the sectorisation era. So I'll just say now thank you very much for watching, and please tune in again when I'll have a video where you can meet the sectors. Thank you for watching, and bye bye for now.